Martin Leverwood had lived in the sleepy town of Somerton for as long as he could remember. Nestled between gently rolling hills and a river that sparkled under the midday sun, it was known only for its orchard-laden countryside and a single bus stop that connected it to the region's bigger towns. Like many people on the outskirts of busy metropolises, the residents lived content but often modest lives filled with routines that marked the passage of time: weekly visits to the market, Sunday church services, and the mutual trade of sugar for flour when cupboards ran low. The community was strong, yet Martin, a poet by nature and profession, had been feeling a sense of isolation that he couldn't quite explain. Every morning, he roamed the town's narrow streets in search of inspiration. Somerton usually offered glimpses of rural beauty: the wildflowers lining the roads, honeybees bobbing among their petals, and ancient stone fences surrounding farms all had potential. Yet, Martin felt the pulse of an unspoken tension in the people's hearts. He couldn't pinpoint its origin, but discovered it in the silence between greetings, in the resentment lurking behind the polite half-smiles. Perhaps this small population had grown weary of modesty, of feeling overshadowed by more glamorous destinations. Maybe it was a restlessness, a longing for something fresh to unify them. Day after day, Martin came up empty. He would sit at his antique wooden desk in the tiny study of his family's old house, where the walls were lined with poetry collections, and stare at the blank pages that refused to accept even a single line. His notebook, worn thin from years of being toted around, seemed lonelier than ever. He feared he might have lost whatever spark had fueled his words. One late afternoon, heavy clouds began to spread across the sky, threatening a storm Somerton hadn't seen in some time. Rain often brought farmers hope for renewed growth. On that day, however, the rumble from above felt like a reflection of Martin's unsettled thoughts. As the air thickened, dogs in various yards began to bark. Shopkeepers hurried to bring in porch signs and display goods, anticipating a sudden downpour at closing time. Martin, an on-and-off insomniac, decided to stroll along the riverbank after dinner, hoping the fresh air might clear his mind. The town had turned quiet, street lamps flickering to life against a backdrop of rolling thunder. Strolling over patched cobblestones, he made his way past the library, the post office, and the small community center. When he arrived by the meandering river, he paused. The water's surface seemed to glow with the sky's reflection, illuminating murmuring currents that made him think of restless dreams. By the time he reached his favorite spot, a low wooden bench beneath an ancient willow, most of Somerton's lights had dimmed for the night. The bench was worn smooth from decades of visitors seeking solace or romance under the drooping branches. He sat and gazed at the water's calm ripples, letting his mind wander. Thunder rumbled louder now, sounding both ominous and oddly comforting. As he was about to stand and head home before the storm broke, he felt a cool pat on his forehead. A single raindrop. Martin reached up and touched the spot, surprised that one tiny droplet could feel so significant. In that moment, he felt an inexplicable shift. The cloud overhead seemed to pause, as though evaluating whether to unleash a torrential shower or simply send forth another hesitant sprinkle. Then came another drop. Then another. Soft, gentle taps against his jacket and the top of his hat formed a delicate rhythm. Martin closed his eyes, letting the rain wrap him in an oddly warm embrace. He realized in that quiet pattern that even the smallest things, a single raindrop, could break the silence in a way that brought people together. This town often yearned for big solutions, big changes, but maybe consistency, even if humble and small, was what truly bound people. The thought bloomed inside his mind with surprising clarity. Two words floated before him: small gifts. He repeated them silently, letting his lips form the shape of each syllable. A tickle of excitement began in his chest. Instinctively, Martin pulled out his battered notebook, flipped to a clean page, and hurriedly scribbled lines as they formed in his head. He wrote about the raindrop as a symbol of hope, of nature's gentle gift to a land in need of healing. Words flowed naturally, forming stanzas about unity, growth, and the exquisite power hidden in something so modest and fleeting. Several minutes passed, and the storm picked up, turning into a proper downpour. Martin dashed home, hugging his notebook to protect those hastily written verses. Rain pelted the rooftops and hammered the roads, shimmering under the streetlights. Yet Martin felt anything but drenched misery. He sensed a renewed energy stirring in him. During the days that followed, Somerton found itself preoccupied with the aftermath of that torrential storm. Some older houses had leaky roofs. The library's windows had to be checked for water damage. Farmers tallied the inches of rainfall, measuring the potential bounty for their crops. Yet Martin found himself in an extended bout of creativity at last. He returned to the poem he'd begun by the willow tree, refining it carefully. The words danced across the page, describing how a single raindrop could carry an entire world of meaning, bridging people through its reminder that nature's gifts came in infinite forms, no matter how small. Even the dryness of Somerton's communal spirit could be softened, little by little, if they shared in the wonder of such simple blessings. Day after day, Martin edged toward finishing the poem. Whenever doubt crept in, he touched the indentation on his forehead, whether real or imagined, felt by that single raindrop, and remembered the shift in his perspective. In short order, he had his final draft. Titled Raindrop Epiphany, it spanned several verses and had a gentle, rolling rhythm reminiscent of the soft tapping of raindrops on a tin roof. He initially read it to himself, but soon shared it with his next-door neighbor, Emma, who taught music at the local grade school. Emma's eyes lit up. "It's so simple, yet it hits you right here," she exclaimed, a hand on her heart. "You need to share this with everyone. Somerton could use a reminder of something bigger than each of us, but still small enough to touch our everyday lives." Encouraged, Martin visited the town library, which had a large bulletin board near the front desk for community announcements, used for everything from rummage sales to choir auditions. He delicately pinned a printout of the poem under a neon pink "New Postings" sign. As he was about to head out, the librarian, Mrs. Dunbar, sidled over. She greeted him with a warm smile, wanting to read whatever fresh creativity he'd brought in. Mrs. Dunbar was known for championing local authors. She believed wholeheartedly in the power of words to unite hearts. She read the poem 3 times in quick succession, then gave Martin a look of deep appreciation. "This is truly lovely," she said. "I'll make copies and place them around. If you don't mind, people need to read this." Martin nodded almost shyly. He was proud yet anxious, worried about how Somerton might react. In times of tension and disconnection, some might scoff at a poem about a raindrop. But Mrs. Dunbar insisted it was just what they needed. Not wanting to dampen her enthusiasm, he gave her permission and quietly slipped out, leaving behind the gentle hum of the library's fluorescent lights. Over the coming days, Somerton seemed to be buzzing in a hush that felt akin to a secret that was rapidly becoming not so secret. Copies of Raindrop Epiphany popped up in unexpected places, on telephone poles that served as makeshift message boards, in the window of the hardware store, and posted at the post office, where lines often snaked out the door on Mondays. Some people read it hurriedly on their way to daily errands. Others lingered, as though soaking in each word. Slowly, a curious transformation began to take shape across town. A group of retirees who met for coffee at the diner discussed the poem, exchanging fond memories of rains long past, how the pitter-patter on old tin roofs used to bring them a sense of calm. A pair of teenage girls who normally only cared about music videos passed by the library's bulletin and paused, reading the lines out loud. They grinned at each other, a quiet recognition that maybe the simplest joys could be the most profound. The local bakery slipstreamed the poem's theme, developing a small pastry shaped like a raindrop and calling it Somerton's Sweet Drop, donating a portion of proceeds to a local community center in need of repairs. The synergy spread. People who read the poem found more easily a reason to smile at each other in the streets. Shopkeepers who'd barely spoken to one another in years started greeting each other warmly in the early mornings before opening. Something had shattered the invisible shell of indifference that had settled around Somerton. On a lazy afternoon, Martin sat on his front porch, nibbling on a scone and drinking tea, watching the townsfolk passing by with new light in their eyes. He saw a conversation spark between a mother carrying groceries and a younger man from across the street who offered to hold the bag for a moment so she could wrangle her excitable toddler. Teenagers paused to talk to older residents about the upcoming harvest fair, the old and young sharing small moments, raindrops of connection that turned into a trickling stream of fellowship. Emma approached Martin one day, her arms filled with sheet music and notebooks. "We've been reading your poem in music class," she said with evident delight. "The kids were so inspired they asked if we could set it to music. I'm no composer, but the lines have such a natural cadence. I think it would sound beautiful with a simple melody." She gave him a hopeful smile that lit her eyes. Martin couldn't contain his grin. "I'm honored," he told her. "I'd love to hear it if you managed to put it together." In the subsequent weeks, Emma transformed Martin's verses into a graceful tune that swayed between major and minor chords, mirroring the gentle rise and fall of a light rain. A few older musicians volunteered to help, each adding a piece of instrumentation: a violin, a softly thrumming guitar, a gentle brush on percussive surfaces that evoked the hush of raindrops. Soon they had a small ensemble. Word got around that the new Somerton Community Choir, ad hoc but enthusiastic, would perform Raindrop Epiphany, the song, at the community center. Martin felt a mix of excitement and disbelief. He never imagined that his small meditation on a single raindrop would find such a home in the hearts of his neighbors. It had begun as a remedy for his own creative drought, but Somerton had taken it and run, weaving it into their daily fabric. And to his utter delight, he witnessed how the poem's message transcended differences. On the evening of the performance, the community center was brighter than Martin had ever seen it. Paper lanterns were hung along the walls, and the local scout troop had made decorations shaped like stylized raindrops to scatter on tables where families and friends could sit. People arrived, mingling, with energy, some in their best Sunday finery, others in plain, everyday clothes, all partaking in nighttime festivities that felt like a holiday. Martin arrived early, sitting quietly in the back row, watching the final rehearsal. The children in Emma's class were on stage, fidgeting with excitement. The volunteer choir members, folks with a miscellany of talents, softly practiced the music. Emma stood in front of them, quietly humming the tune. Curiosity and conversation rippled through the gathering crowd. The performance started with a few words from the local pastor about community spirit. Then Emma introduced the piece, explaining how a single raindrop and the mind of a fellow Somerton resident had sparked such resonance. She concluded her remarks with a gracious gesture toward Martin in the back, causing him to shift in his seat bashfully as a wave of applause rushed through the room. The lights dimmed, Emma raised her hands, and the children began a gentle hum that swelled. The violin joined, gliding through the air with a lonesome but hopeful strain. Then the guitar added soft chords, joined by the pattering percussion reminiscent of summer rain on a window pane. This raindrop epiphany was so enchanting that people began to lean in as if they were physically drawn to it. The words washed over them. From the hush of heaven's cloud, a single drop is shed, nature's fragile vow to mend what's torn or dead. Each line, once read silently by the townsfolk, found new life as it floated across the community center. The children's voices rose in unison, carrying Martin's poem to even deeper emotional territory. In that shimmering sphere of dew, a promise softly wakes, uniting me and you in the hope creation makes. People teared up. The older generation recalled the long summers of resilience, and the younger saw older neighbors in a loving light. Couples reached for each other's hands, and solitary onlookers found strangers offering warm smiles. Something potent yet intangible wove them all together in that moment. As the last note faded, a whisper of reverence filled the space, and then came the sound of heartfelt applause. Emma bowed, the children beamed, and Martin in the back felt tears slip down his cheeks. The performance had ended, but the night was still young. Someone turned on gentle background music. Children scurried around with an energetic sense of freedom, while the older folks rose from their seats to mingle. Several approached Martin to thank him, to hug him, to reminisce. He felt stunned by a wave of gratitude, overhearing anecdotes about the simple changes that had occurred lately, neighbors reconnecting, small courtesy gestures around town, a sense of renewed unity both surprising and needed. A stooped older man, Mr. Thaddeus Green, Somerton's retired postmaster, approached Martin with a trembling hand outstretched. "I want to thank you, son. I'd forgotten how a simple drop of rain can carry so much. My wife always loved the sound of rain on our roof, and since she passed away, I've tried to tune out those memories. But your poem brought them back, in a good way, reminded me that her presence isn't truly gone." Martin was speechless, overwhelmed by the emotion shining in Mr. Green's eyes. He placed his hand on the older man's shoulder, returning the thanks. That night, Martin realized just how powerful words and the small wonders that inspired them could be. Somerton sustained that newfound spirit even after the performance. The synergy from Raindrop Epiphany continued to blossom in ways Martin never anticipated. The high school literature teacher made the poem part of her curriculum to spark discussions on the symbolism of nature and small gestures. Local caregivers pinned copies in nursing homes to bring cheer. People who had previously breezed by each other began sharing more conversation, forging new ties and rekindling old ones. One bright morning, Martin found himself invited to a special town council meeting. The invitation noted that his presence was requested for a project that might interest him, though no specifics were mentioned. When he arrived at the council building, he was greeted warmly by the mayor, a reserved woman named Margaret Higgins, who had always admired the arts, but rarely had time for any personal involvement in them. "I wanted to speak with you about something," the mayor said, leading Martin into a small conference room. "The council has been discussing ways to uplift Somerton's public spaces, perhaps with a mural or an engraved plaque, to commemorate the sense of togetherness we've felt these past weeks. We were wondering if you might help us select a few of your verses. We'd like to make them a permanent fixture somewhere." Martin's eyes widened in amazement. He could scarcely believe that a poem which had begun as a personal introspection on a rainy night could become part of Somerton's identity. "I'd be honored," he stammered, "truly honored. Tell me more about your vision." The mayor explained that the plan was for a local artist, known for whimsical paintings depicting nature themes, to create a mural featuring the imagery of raindrops, clouds, and the Somerton skyline. At the center, near the heart of the piece, would be lines from Martin's poem, etched in large script for passers-by to read. The mural would grace the exterior of the community center fitting, given that was where the poem had first been heard publicly in full melody. Martin felt a thrill course through him. He nodded eagerly. Soon, he found himself collaborating with that local artist, whose name was Bernadette, an exuberant woman known for bright laughter. Under her guidance, Martin picked out lines from Raindrop Epiphany that would flow best as a visual. Bernadette sketched mock-ups of graceful pouring clouds, silver blue drops that shimmered, and outlines capturing Somerton's modest skyline. They decided on a swirl of color that could evoke the swirl of possibilities carried in each droplet of rain. The day of the mural's debut dawned with the same heavy clouds that had inspired Martin all those weeks ago. But this time, the threat of rain didn't dampen the mood. People gathered, umbrellas at the ready, smiling at each other in anticipation. When Bernadette and Martin pulled the covering aside, the audience clapped and cheered at the sight of Somerton's new public artwork. The mural showed a gradient sky that shifted from dusty gray to brilliant gold near the horizon, symbolizing the transformations that hope could spark. Giant luminous raindrops descended onto the rooftops, each containing subtle images of Somerton's landmark. At the center, in cursive script, were Martin's words: "A single drop of heaven's grace upon our hearts does fall, awakening kindness we'd misplaced, a gift for one and all." The crowd hushed for a moment, taking in the painting and reading the lines. This was an actual representation of Somerton's story. Once a bit weary, but never lacking in potential, through the smallest of gifts, a raindrop, a poem, it had rediscovered its best self. Over the next week, Somerton took on various communal projects. People organized a reading club, bridging older folks who had time to read widely with busy parents who yearned to reclaim a sliver of imagination. Families involved themselves in volunteer days, sprucing up the park by the river, planting flowers in beds that had long been neglected. Teachers found fresh ways to engage children, sometimes reciting lines from Raindrop, Epiphany, or related poems during quiet reading hour. Little by little, Somerton realized that unity was not just a vague notion, but something they could live out day by day. All this time, Martin continued to write. Inspired by the changes he saw around him, he compiled a small poetry collection, focusing on nature's ability to heal, unify, and uplift. Raindrop Epiphany stood as its opening piece, the gateway to a broader conversation on life's beauty and the hidden links binding people together. He dedicated the collection to Somerton, grateful for how the town had embraced his words and made them part of their story. Eventually, as autumn came around, Somerton's orchard trees glowed with warm reds and yellows, leaves drifting lazily to the ground. Now that the harvest time arrived, the tradition of the annual Harvest Festival took on a brighter, more joyous atmosphere. Families lingered longer in each other's company. Children darted around the festival stalls, devouring freshly baked apple pies. Neighbors chatted easily about everyday happenings, a newborn baby on Fifth Street, an older couple hitting a milestone anniversary, or a new teacher arriving at the school with fresh ideas. Near the close of the festival, Martin sat at a little signing table on the festival grounds, a stack of his freshly printed poetry articles next to him. People stopped by to tell him how Raindrop Epiphany had changed how they looked at something so small, how they felt more open, more connected to each other. He was deeply moved by their stories. Some asked him to sign their copy or to inscribe a thoughtful message. He felt a surge of gratefulness for the small town that had nurtured him and, in turn, had found something uplifting in his writing. As dusk arrived, Martin left his table and strolled toward the orchard's edge. He could see the community center's rooftop from there, and even in the fading light, the mural was visible, the clouds and raindrops shining under the last traces of sun. Children were laughing, a choir of camaraderie that echoed the melody once performed inside that same building. The wind carried a slight chill, but it also carried the comforting aroma of baked goods and hot cider, wafting through the festival. Pausing to observe the setting, Martin recalled that single raindrop on his forehead weeks before, how it had woken him from his creative slumber. How odd and wonderful that one small droplet of water, ephemeral in every sense, could change the perspective of a poet and, by extension, a whole town. He could hear a band warming up on the festival's small stage, likely preparing a final set of folk tunes for the evening. Families were still gathered in clusters, nibbling on snacks while the sun continued its descent. Through the gaps of orchard trees, Martin caught glimpses of shimmering basket lights. All around him, Somerton existed in a state of gentle celebration, an expression of unity and gratitude. It was a far cry from the tension he had once felt. The lines from his poem, now etched upon that mural and embedded in the hearts of many, had become Somerton's gentle reminder of what truly mattered. And Martin, listening to the subdued hush of the crowd, felt a deep sense of peace. In time, the moment would pass, but the memory of it would remain, just like that raindrop, quietly showing him the power something so small could hold. He turned back toward the festival, letting the orchard's light glimmer on his path, eager to rejoin his neighbors in their celebration. In that shared warmth, Martin found proof that life's greatest epiphanies can spring from the simplest of gifts.